Thank you, Zahara, for joining us on Femme Futurists for the series of conversations that we're having with leading futurists and thinkers that are shaping the future. And I'm Nancy Giordano, and came up with this idea with my partner, Emma Pezak, as we started thinking about, as we were following other women, and we were seeing the work that so many were doing that was fascinating. We wanted to get to know you and your work better. And rather than just having these conversations in private, thought it would be useful to record them and share them with other people so that they too could learn about the work that we're all doing. So Femme Futurist Society is a part of my work. I run a consultancy called Play Big Inc. I have a speaking site. I do things for youth. And actually, I'm really excited to talk about your youth work, because I think you and I do a lot of work in that arena as well. And I know you just started something that will be interesting to learn more about. So Zahara Chetty, I found you on LinkedIn. We have never met before. This is it. This is our first date. And I am thrilled to get to know you more in person. I feel like I've learned a fair amount about you from the things that you post and the pieces that you've written. And again, just stunned at how aligned they are with some of the thinking that I have and some of the folks. Like when I saw your recent post and you had Otto Scharmer on there and you had a mention of Parker Palmer in there and others, I was like, oh my God, these are all people that I find really fascinating, and I find their work really opens new doorways for some of the opportunities in the future and as we help guide folks. So first, just tell us where you are and how you describe your work. Like, who are you?
Okay, so, well, thank you for having me here. It's great to be here. I'm in South Africa, in Pretoria. And I think it's very difficult to describe the work that I do, in one title or, in any way, because it's so vast. I do so many different things with so many different people. And usually, this kind of work is a very undefined, ambiguous space. Nobody really knows what it is or how to define it, or so it's very difficult to say. But basically, if I have to sum it up, I say I help people find more conscious solutions to complex issues that they're facing, and I help them just explore things, kind of holding their hand, taking them through it. So
you have a research component to your work too, right?
Yeah. So initially I got into, so let me explain how I got here, right?
I know these are always long origin stories. I know.
Yeah. So obviously growing up in South Africa, I would never have thought, okay, I want to be a futurist. This is something I want to study, and just go for it. We had very limited understanding of what was going on. There were very few options for us. So, but, I've always been interested in everything, in so many different subjects, so many different things. And I could never choose just one profession. And I couldn't choose one path to study. And I was interested in psychology and programming, computer science and art and everything. And I said, why do I have to choose? So I studied everything, right? It was just so fascinating for me. So I did fashion design, and I was, working in that for quite a few years. And then I studied psychology, English literature, anthropology, and computer science. And then I just because I was fascinated by them, and I said, what am I going to do with all this knowledge? So I started teaching, and I taught for about 9 years. Oh. And I used to teach. Sorry?
No, I was exclaiming, wow, I didn't realize that was part of your.
So I taught physics and computer science for about 9 years. And the situation in South Africa, right? Schools can be very dangerous places. And I actually ended up leaving because of the violence. It wasn't something I was prepared for. I wasn't trained as a policeman. You end up doing more social work and acting like a riot policeman instead of teaching, because things can be very bad in certain areas. And I was actually assaulted by a student, hit in the face with a bag because they were running, out of my class, and it just got out of hand. So I decided to leave. I went into software, and I joined a software company, doing front end and just kind of exploring the space. And because I had so much of background in human-computer interaction and that kind of thing, I just naturally went into UX. And then from there, it went into design thinking. And Usually I found myself in a space where every time I went to a new company, I ended up starting the UX or the design thinking kind of process with them because it was new and nobody knew what was going on. So I kind of helped them to figure it out. And that just developed into strategy work and research and, you know, just innovation stuff, because I think in that space, everybody's a little afraid to go and do something. They all want to do it, but nobody knows how to approach it, or even taking decisions is so hard. So, you know, if you're used to, you know, being in that kind of space and just kind of making decisions or just exploring things without worrying about failure, then it's easy for other people to also do that, you know, when they have someone to take their hand along with them.
Right, or as more of a coach or a guide
Yeah.
in that space. You know, it's so fascinating. I just read your Medium piece on the polymath and the idea that we're generalists as opposed to specialists, and reinterpreting the jack of all trades, master of none. And I was like, oh my God, she is so my soul sister. Like I mean, that is so my background. And it's interesting when I do talks, how many people come up to me that are similar, and they find themselves sometimes out of place in their organizations because they do have a very broad curiosity and ability to apply and think about things. And years ago, I'll send you the link, a person wrote an article, David Dow wrote an article in World Futurist Society magazine about the importance of being a synthesist. And talked so much about the fact that we're in a world where so much data and information comes in that we keep becoming more and more and more specialized and more narrow. And there are people who love to master information to get better at the narrow thing, but that creates big gaps then between us. And it's really important to have those people that are natural bridge builders or are interested in taking in new information and synthesizing it and turning it on to others. And he at the time estimated there were 5% of the population that think that way. I think it's probably closer to 10, but that's not the majority. And so when I read the article, I was like, oh, I feel found. I feel seen. I now know why I don't want to just, you know, specify, you know, get specific about this versus the other. And the part I smiled in your article, right, is when people want, like really they're doing in their best interest to encourage us to get narrow, right? Whether it's your mother or whether it's, you know, a close friend or a mentor, they really want you to, you know, be an expert at blank. And the reality is there are certain, you know, of us who find the fascination in the link between the things and being able to
Definitely.
apply, right? This thinking over here to that problem over there. And so I totally get it. And you wrote
Yeah,
it very eloquently.
thank you. Yeah, it's, you know, it's been a problem in school, you know, my whole life. Everybody wants, like, you know, wants you to be something. You have to be a specific career. You have to follow a certain path. And I always, you know, admired people who, you know, knew what they wanted to be from day one, and they like just went and studied it and became it. And I wanted to be everything, and I had the chance to do that. I mean, I was a writer, I was a designer, I did wall murals for, you know, I did lots of different things. And it was fascinating. I think it just enriched my life a lot more. And I wouldn't be happy just doing one thing every day. And working in this space, is you're always looking for new things that, you know, you keep ahead of the trends in so many different industries. It's hard for people to do that. I think they get overwhelmed with it because they can't make sense of so many things in so many different topics, so many different industries, so many different subjects. So they just tend to focus on one thing. But what you find when you're working with them is that they each have only one perspective of what's going on. And somebody has to actually bring that together, you know, synthesize all those different perspectives to create a whole holistic view of what's going on for you to be able to even approach a problem. Otherwise, whatever you create from there is going to be, you know, unbalanced. And that's why we have a situation in the world right now. It's very business driven, very capitalistic solutions we have. It's all about money. It's all about shareholder value. And now we started this thing in user experience design, where we say we want to build what's best for the users, but ultimately it's more about businesses creating products that still get them more revenue. You don't really care about what's happening long term in the environment and what your products are actually doing long term. You know, it's still a very
I mean,
myopic
that's the
view.
opportunity, right? And that's why I think we're so passionate about the work that we do. We are starting to see that opening. We've been talking about this for more than a decade, about this idea of moving from just, you know, shareholder value to stakeholder value, and thinking about the whole and thinking about externalities and understanding the connections that we have. And I know I feel very passionately that when you put the humans at the center of the design process and the innovation process and even the capitalist process, you are able to create meaningful solutions that take into consideration all those things and still create revenue, right? It's not an either or situation. So it's an outdated myth that we get to continue to, blow up and have people see a much better solution. So stories around that, where you can see more examples of organizations that have figured out a way to be able to navigate successfully financially and socially or humanistically. Do you have any examples of companies that you've worked with or stories that you think are help give other people better understanding what we're saying?
So it's, when I worked with the corporates, it was very difficult for them to change their mindset. And I think the bigger the corporate, the more difficult it is for them to shift their thinking. Because even in the building structures, you see, the hierarchy is the way it is. Like, I worked in a bank and they had they occupied 20-story buildings, and each level was like a different hierarchy or different level of type of workers, and there were certain floors that were not accessible to people, and it basically was a representation of how they thought in the business. Like, certain people on certain levels have certain amount of power, and that's how it is. It's not about equality. It's not about what's best for everybody. It's about money and power, and a lot of companies are very reluctant to change that mindset, because it's a self-serving thing. You don't really want to give away your power to the rest of society, to the rest of the community. Even if you have to sacrifice them and the environment for your benefit, you'll do it. So I tend to work more with startups and ventures and people who are just exploring new ideas and social enterprises, because they get it, and smaller the company, the much easier it is for them to shift and to be influenced, especially in the early stages. But when you're working with a big company, it takes a lot of energy and a lot of effort for you to shift. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, I know that work with really, really large organizations. Sometimes they do get it. And when they do get it, it's really powerful. We did some work with Nestle in the frozen food work divisions, like a $6 billion division at the time of a certainly much larger organization, but they control a big portion of the food world. And they really did get it. And it was phenomenal. And it taught us a lot about the idea about being able to shift from, again, building things for consistency and scale, and building it more for congruence and care, and thinking about it really differently, and how to orient and prioritize resources and open resources and build relationships that were really different. We had this amazing path that we've built together with them. So that was really, really hopeful, but many have a more difficult time getting there. I think now that there's an opening. I really do think that there is a shift. Yeah. I think, in the West, when 181 CEOs signed on to the Business Roundtable commitment to put stakeholders at least equal, if not ahead of shareholders, which includes community and includes environment and includes employees, et cetera, it was a very encouraging day. Challenging to get there, but an encouraging day. And I do think the pandemic has helped accelerate that thinking, where people have to really think differently about how they're applying these resources and building loyalty. And there will be, I think, more appreciation of that coming out of this over the next year or two, when people start to really say, what were the companies that really showed up? How did they show up? How did they hold their employees? And will become much more, I think, aware is the right word, but the more scrutiny will be paid on that, more attention will be paid to that. So there's more incentive then, I think, for these organizations to make that shift. Don't you think?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even right now I'm working with some venture builder, which is also working with the government in Malaysia and Indonesia. And we're basically looking at the whole economic model. And we've come up with this thing called the just economy. So basically, it's about social justice and developing businesses that are, and startups that basically, benefit everybody. So you've got the stakeholders are, getting their profit out of it. People are getting ethical goods out of it, and it's sustainable. It's not harming the environment. So everybody benefits, and it's just about looking at things from a different model and making sure that the whole system is working. It's not just about, when you pitch ideas at a startup competition or something like that, they only care about the business model and how much revenue you're going to generate. They don't ask you things about the ecosystem, how it's going to affect, and what the long-term impact is. What are the externalities that your business is going to cause? Nobody cares about those things. So we are trying to shift the whole mentality around starting up, businesses, and how to create sustainable, ethical businesses that are of value and can last in the world. So we started with that. So that's carrying on in Malaysia and Indonesia, and hopefully we bring it to Africa as well.
I think it's great. And I think you hit a really important point there, which is like always trying to get closer and closer to the point either of impact or of incentive. So again, if you're part of a startup competition and they aren't asking those questions, or you're going to VCs and they aren't asking that question, then no one's incentivized to answer those questions. And even if they do, they're sometimes penalized for having that perspective, right? So I think that we always have to get back to where is it that we can really fix where the problem is starting from. And I think that's a really big piece of it is understanding on the whole investor side of it, whether it's on the capital market side, and we talk about really short-term gains that we want people to make, and we ask for these outsized returns for these startups, and they have to, compromise a lot of what their initial vision was, honestly, to be able to deliver that, or if it's just, everyday shareholders that are thinking about this differently. It's interesting. I was just pulling an example of something. So they, World Economic Forum does their technology pioneers sort of whatever review each year, and they list the 100 really big world-changing ideas. Fast Company does something similar. So in the one the World Economic Forum just released, they have a company called Capital AI, I think. Yeah, I might be butchering this. I want to say it's Capital AI, and it's really applying artificial intelligence to being able to do much more thoughtful scrutiny on the social and environmental impact that a business has, so investors can be guided more thoughtfully to the places that they're putting their investments, which I think is, again, you gotta trust the algorithm. I'm not sure exactly how this whole thing is built, but those kinds of tools are the kinds of things that I think will continue to incentivize organizations from startups to, multinational global companies to pay more attention to those things.
Yeah, I think also, this whole pandemic has definitely shifted that thinking that we have to pay attention to things other than just, the money, and, notice what effect it's having on the environment and on people and societies and communities, because you can just see how it fuels inequality. And that's one of the biggest, outcomes and issues we have with the way businesses are running today.
100%. I did a talk this morning for a group of global entrepreneurs for the Entrepreneurs Organization, and we talked about the 4 pandemic awakenings that I've been talking a lot about. And equality and equity, accessibility, all that is a huge one. It's one of the 4, right? The environment is one, that is one, our ability to adapt to digital processes more than we thought that we could is another, and then certainly our own resilience around that and our support systems. But I do think that the support side, or the equity side, equitable, and not just about whether or not people have access, right? It's going so much deeper and understanding the systemic institutional biases that have been built in both racially and gender and ethnic, that we now are being forced to confront. Is that happening as much in where you are?
I think South Africa, the entire country, all of our systems are built on inequality, especially, the education system. Because when we were in apartheid, we had separate everything, right? Separate places to live, separate schools, separate organizations or government agencies for different race groups. So the education was, disparate from the start. So Black schools were separate. They had a different level of education, Indian schools, white schools. And when, apartheid was over and we had the 1994 elections, everybody went and voted and stuff. The law was changed, but nothing changed on the ground, because you voted, you went back home. You went back home to those Black townships or the Indian townships or those white suburbs. You went back to those schools. Nobody changed it. The government forcibly put people in different areas to live. They took them out of their homes and they put them in different areas. And now, even though apartheid is over, how are those people supposed to get out of those areas? They still live in poverty. They still don't have the education that they need to be able to get out of poverty. And education is so, unequal, because you have to have so much money to get a good quality education. So how is it supposed to be serving the poor? That's one of the biggest issues, and it hasn't been changed since then. It's like over 25 years.
Well, 25 feels like nothing compared to the United States, where we've been doing this for 300 years. So, and around the world probably for thousands. And so I do think if you had, if you were queen of the universe, Zahara, where would you put the most emphasis? Like, where do you think the leverage needs to be in order to drive that change? Is it government leaders? Is it businesses that need to be more active in it? Is it raising the consciousness of people? Like, where is it that you
Look,
believe the emphasis needs to be, and how does that fit in with your
I
work?
think we're at a point where there's no one person that's going to fix it. It has to be a collaborative effort because we need the kind of education that prepares people for a future society that we want to have. Having the government imagine what our future should be like didn't work in the past, and it's not going to work in the future. Leaving it to business is also, a bad idea. So everybody is a stakeholder in education. I mean, education is there to socialize people, to show them how to live and be a part of society. And right now, our education system is not doing that. I mean, look around. What kind of people are we producing in the world? They don't care about anything. They can't do anything. They can't even think for themselves because schools teach them to think in a certain way. There's always a model answer that you have to strive for. You're not allowed to go outside the box. And then all of a sudden, we want people to be innovative and come up with new ideas. It doesn't work like that.
Well, right, because it's a 20th century model, right, designed for a very different type of work and a different type of society. And now we're moving to the 21st. And I do think your creative background as an artist in so many ways, helps you deal with ambiguity and understand the connections between things and being really excited about this idea of trying new things and risk taking. Most people are not either geared that way or trained that way or certainly educated that way. So it becomes very scary to imagine walking into ambiguity or walking into something that isn't defined. And so I do think the education system has been just an amplification of that way of thinking. And so, the interesting thing is as we move forward, and we certainly see in the West here, there will be a giant rethinking of higher education, as well as lower, but certainly higher education, and thinking about how I think students are going to have so many more options. Right? Those are connected to technology. They'll have a whole globe that they can choose from about how they want to learn and where they want to learn from eventually. The question will be getting everyone to that access. And we're certainly seeing that a big portion of this during the pandemic, right? Folks who don't have access to broadband, folks who don't have access to the technology. I was on a call this morning with a woman from Tanzania who was like, we don't have electricity. Well, that does seem to be the starting point for some of this, right?
Yeah.
So the question is how do you get to that level of being able to, like, I just think there has to be a big blow up of it, like just expecting people to change the pedagogy or change the syllabus. I think it needs to be much bigger than that, don't you?
Yeah, definitely. So that's why I said, everybody needs to have a stake in this. Even, businesses and the mobile operators, there's no infrastructure in Africa. We like the last, place on earth where there's no internet. I mean, there's so many kids that don't have access to anything. They don't have access to a classroom. They don't have access to toilets and sanitation facilities. And we are talking about 5G. So
Right.
we're leaving Africa behind the rest of the world. So this is the thing, right? We have the technology to go to Mars, but we don't have the technology to build, sanitation and give people electricity right here on Earth. So, what is all this technology for? We need to use it to build equitable futures for people. So we want to use the technology and so all the advances in science that we have, with human-centered design and just create better futures for everybody.
I think what's stunning is when you look at the average and the median age of countries in Africa versus in the West or even in Asia, it is stunning, right? See how young Africa is in these countries.
Yeah.
And literally average ages that are 17 and 18 and 20 versus 37 and 42 in developed countries like Germany and Japan. And so to imagine 10 years from now, this investment that we would need to make, or that we should be making in countries like Africa, South Africa, the whole continent. I guess the question is what will finally, I guess I am very hopeful when you look at the future and you think about 10 or 20 years from now, and you think about the brain power and the creativity and the amount of innovation that could be unleashed, just the most bare minimum amount of investment made in being able to create accessibility. Does it give you some hope, or do you really feel as though Africa would be left behind?
I think definitely, there's a lot of hope because there's so much potential here, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And it needs to start now because the kids are here now waiting. We can't wait till they're 30 to start educating them. We don't want them to be a generation of unemployed people. They're going to be the next economy. We have to focus on them. And one of the issues I have, it's not just about giving them digital skills. This Africa itself has so much of, you know, unprocessed trauma because of all the things that we've went through over so many years. You know, every single country, you know, on this continent has a history of trauma, colonialism, slavery, racism, apartheid, whatever. And people have not recovered from that. Now, you have to, you know, have to deal with that in some way before you try to build, you know, this bright, beautiful future, because it's not going to solve, if you don't do that, it's not going to solve the problems that we have. South Africa is one of the most violent places on the planet. You can't even walk on the street. You know, you're not allowed to walk alone anyway because you could be assaulted or killed. And a lot of countries are like that. There's so much latent anger and pain in the system, in people, and they're unconscious about it. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to process it. And that affects what we create in the world. So we cannot build, you know, this brighter light future without dealing with all those dark things.
That is such a profound idea, because we talk a lot about this idea that you have access to 21st century technology that will be exponential. And if we don't approach it from a healthy place and we replace it with that process, man, that can be a really, really dangerous thing. It was an interesting workshop I did last year, and it's a long story, but there's this map that I help people create to help them they sort of process their own emotions around the future, and what are they relieved by and inspired by and frustrated by and fearful of. And people sort of map things into various quadrants. And this one woman who was probably in that group, the one who had spent the most time on her own self-awareness and self-development, had studied yoga in India and was much more conscious herself, put youth in the thing that she's afraid of box. And I was like, how can you be afraid of that? And she's like, again, if they aren't well held, sort of was the way that she was thinking about it, but if they aren't are able to process this and aren't nurtured well from a young age, then they will be a very dangerous group if they're given these technologies and these platforms moving forward. Right. And I thought, wow, I've never really thought about it that way. It was a really profound conversation that she just brought to light and that you're amplifying, that this is a really critical.
Yeah. And I think, you know, we've seen that in America when we watch the news and a lot of other places, but I think it's going to be even worse here because there's so much to deal with and nobody knows how to deal with it. They don't teach you that. And most people don't even have a self-identity. They've been denied a sense of self for so long, or told that they're worthless or they're not good enough or that kind of thing for, you know, so many generations. It's so much of intergenerational trauma. It's not just individual trauma that we have to deal with. And I think the only way to start that conversation is to let the stories be told, because I mean, it's been erased from our own histories. We never learned what actually happened. You won't know it until you actually start speaking to people. And they were so afraid to tell those stories before. And I think that's part of the transition process, just allowing people to express themselves in, you know, different forms with art and with whatever it is, you know, just let those stories come out and then we can take that in. So, you know, into the next, into building the future. It's a very holistic way of looking at things. So it's not just about technology. I think the government is focusing on teaching robotics and coding, you know, for the fourth industrial revolution, but nobody's looking at the person as a whole. How are they going to live in the future?
Totally. Yeah, I was in a conversation with another futurist and we had this conversation about STEAM or STEM. And then we talked about STEAM where you add art into it. And then I was like, STEAM with 2 A's. And I think awareness, like self-awareness, healing and actualization and all that needs to be a really big portion of our own learning constantly. And we're certainly, again, I think paying a bit more attention to this in the West because of the pandemic and recognizing how high levels of our own anxiety and you know, struggles to cope are. But I think yours, to your point, both with the racism awareness and marches that are happening here, and then much more conscious looking at the history and listening to the stories, and certainly where you are as well, it is it's a really, really big part of the healing that needs to happen. So flipping this to us, you know, I was trying to look for the opportunity and the optimism in this, and so you have created something that is a part of the solution for this. So you want to tell us about the African Future?
Yeah. So the African Futures Academy. So I just created this as, you know, something to start the process, you know, a space where we can explore how to deal with all these things. So we have this very young population in Africa, these young kids who are pretty much left out of the whole technological evolution, like I said, you know, and our education systems were not designed to develop them to their full potential. And nobody's going to change that unless we do something about it. The government is ill-equipped to deal with it. Businesses don't care because there's no money in it for them. And everybody has bits and pieces of solutions, but I say, we need to create something where people can work together, collaborate from all different kinds of areas with the government, with businesses, with people themselves, with students, with anyone who's interested in this, this problem of creating people that are able to create more equitable futures for themselves. So everybody has a certain potential, this certain purpose to live, and they never got to do it in the past. They were not allowed to be whatever they want to be, and they don't even know how to do that. And school doesn't teach you that. So whether and people are starting to homeschool their kids. They're starting to take them out of schools. They're deschooling them. Lots of things are happening, but you can see there's a shift. Schools are just inadequate at fulfilling the needs of the future, and we've known that for a long time. And I think also just taking the existing schooling model and putting it online is not going to change much. It gives kids access to the same thing that they always had, but the thing that they always had is not preparing them for the future. So I created this, this project to basically explore what we can do in the space. So it's not, businesses, people are very quick to come and say, let's, create this platform, this LMS, this learning space, and, just start charging kids to learn. And I said, it's not what it's meant to be. It needs to unfold. It needs to become what it needs to be. And I think any creative project is supposed to be that way. You're supposed to let it have its own intention and see what it's supposed to be. And so we're still exploring things. And right now it's all about expressing this thing about expressing the emotions and dealing with the underlying issues is coming up quite a bit. So before we explore how to get kids, to learn the 21 future skills and how to become 21st century citizens and work in the fourth industrial revolution, they have to first, identify with themselves and be self-aware.
What age are you centered on with this?
So we're looking at kids who are 13 and above, because they can start thinking about what they want to do with their lives, and in high school they have access to social media and that kind of thing. So we don't want to end up in legal issues with them using the platforms and things like that. But also we have different things that we're working on. So we already started going to schools, speaking to kids and teachers and principals, just finding out what the awareness is like, about the fourth industrial revolution and different skills that they're going to need for the future and how prepared or unprepared they are, and just having those conversations and seeing what people feel and think about it. And we're just taking it from there. So we're building as we go along.
I totally believe in the emergence and letting things take their shape, but I'm also going to push you a little bit just to help us understand. Is it the idea to create curriculum that you would, just things that you're exploring, curriculum that you would roll out, or places where kids would gather and learn, or to help the homeschool?
So yeah, it's a lot of different things. So one of the core things is the 21 skills, or all the future skills that they need to have to work in the fourth industrial revolution and kind of shape their lives and their futures. So there would be a curriculum around that, but it's also not just subjects or the way we learn it right now. It's going to be like a phenomenologic learning space, because we need to combine things. They need to work on problem solving. It's not just, okay, let's learn this, let's memorize it and then do a test. These are skills that you have to practice. So you have to be immersed in some kind of actual real life problem that you need to use it on. So it's kind of simulating things that, whether it's, so it's context based, in Africa, what kind of problems they have in their communities, what problems they might need to solve in the future. And then these are the skills and the tools that can help them do that in real life. So yeah.
There's a woman here in Austin, one of my closest friends, who is phenomenal. And she was a tech executive, worked for big, huge multinationals, and then worked for some tech startups, including in artificial intelligence, and was, helped build these things from the ground up, and really has that same feeling that you do about youth and that same pull to youth. And she has started something called Active a Team. Her name is Shaku. And she will love every sentence that you were saying. You guys are aligned. And so we'll somehow hook you up so you can see what she's also creating in this space, because I think we are also drawn. I was I did one of the first TEDx events in the world for adults in Austin, and we did 4 of them. But then we really were pulled to youth, and so for 6 years, mentored a group of teens and created for teens a TEDx event. It was actually really quite huge. Like, it was one of the largest in the world. And at one year, I think we had 800 students that came, and it was a phenomenal experience. And then created the career fair for the future that right now is just sort of more of a beta. We haven't really had a chance to fully blow it up yet, but there is this really big pull to help kids, in my world, it's a slightly different problem that we're trying to solve for, which is having faith in the future. There's a tremendous negative narrative around it so often. And to let them know that there's actually so much positivity and so much possibility and so much that can be created, and we're not all going to die with climate change or robot takeovers, and that we have a place in it. And so I do think that there's this really powerful pull to helping this generation. And there's some other work that we're doing with economist, thinker, and author Rianne Eisler, who really is going all the way to birth. Like, she really feels like the investment needs to be made 0 to 4 in neurological health and well-being, so that child is secure enough to be able to do all the things that we're asking of this 21st century population, right? About being creative and innovative and collaborative requires actually a different kind of holding from the very beginning, and brain development from the very beginning. So
yeah, definitely.
there's plenty
Yeah,
of
so, sorry?
No, I said there's plenty of room for this work. There's a lot.
Yeah, there's so much to be done. And everybody doing little bits and pieces needs to just add to that collective effort, I think. So we just need to amplify each other's voices, and that's the only way you're going to get this kind of problem solved.
Well, I think, again, I honor your commitment to this and Shaku's commitment to it and Rianne's commitment to it, that there are so many people who are out there who are really actively trying to create solutions and not just talk about it, but are actually in there building and doing. There's this term that we came up with years ago called cultural acupuncture. So, Zahara's doing her thing here, and Shaku's doing her thing here, Rianne's doing her thing here, and at some point it all radiates the change that we want. And we're seeing that, I think, even now. So much of what many of us have been talking about for a decade or longer is now becoming, I think, more accepted, and people are more open to it, and are ready for some really big changes. So I think this work is really, really important. And I'm sure it is tiring and exhausting, and it's not always easy to be a futurist, and it's not easy to be a person who thinks more, again, systemically or in a synthesized way as opposed to in a narrow way, which is how people are used to solving problems. But I really admire your work and what it is that you are doing there. And I will keep trying to think of ways to knit some resources together to figure out how we can help more. Because I think it's, there's a lot that we have here that we can share. And then there's also a lot I think we can learn. And the good news, I guess, about where you are is that it's less institutionalized. We have so much to change in our current structures because it's so deeply ingrained. And I think there is some hopefulness about the fact that there's some stuff that can be created from in a more open environment, potentially, where you are. Could be wrong, but if you get to build from scratch, let's build it right, and more dynamic and robust solutions. So anything else you want to share with us about where you are and what you're doing? It seems like you're very busy, and your work is focused there. Anything else you want the world to know before we sign off?
Yeah, so I'm just, for right now, this is, my project, and I'm working on also something on trauma healing, just researching that right now, because that's, I think, a big thing for the future. Everybody has to go through that. There's a mass awakening on the planet. Everybody is trying to find ways to heal, and you can see it, where the weak points are in the system. If you look at the globe, as a whole, and everybody needs to do that work. Everybody needs to participate in that, and we need to teach the children how to do that. So, because that's the only way we're going to have a decent future.
I totally agree.
Thank you.
I was going to say, and I do think that, to your point, adults need to become really good, more comfortable in that arena, and better guides for our children in that space. So it's really hard to raise children in that way if you haven't done the work yourself. I think, again, just to bring it back a little bit to technology, I do think that at least on the West, there are some interesting advances that are happening where people have tools that can help them in more accessible ways, more affordable ways than we've been able to do before. So whether that is a meditation app, or whether that is a chatbot therapist, or whether that is, a group or a community that you can join in some way that have a shared story, I do think there's some ways in which hopefully there's a merge between what it is that we are seeking that we need as humans, and the way that technology can hold us in that connection to that. So
Yeah.
try and guide, what we create.
Yeah, definitely. So that's the whole point of using technology to solve these problems, because we couldn't do it in the past. Now we have all this new technology to help us facilitate those changes.
Yeah, that's where I think that the merge gets to happen. We're at this really, really phenomenal moment in time where, 50 years from now or 100 years from now, it's going to look really different than it does now. We can look back to what it is that we were thoughtfully and intentionally creating at this moment.
Yes.
Thank you for everything that you do. I'm so glad that we are connected and I get to stay in touch with your work. And we will put links in at the end where people can find out more about you. You are not very active on Twitter, my friend. Very, very active on LinkedIn and not at all on Twitter. So I don't know if that's intentional, but we will certainly guide people to your LinkedIn because I think you post such thoughtful pieces there. And any place else you'd like us to, shine more light on your work. And, we'll stay in touch. I don't know where this is also an emergent thing. We're trying to figure out what this community grows to be and where the needs are and where we can really help support this appetite for foresight and for more conscious, perspectives on the future. So we will stay in touch.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm really glad you decided to start this Femme Futurists thing. It's great.
It's good for all of us. I think we all need it. I learned so much by every one of these conversations, and we're thoughtful.
It's been really interesting going through, all the profiles and just seeing what other people are doing.
Great. Well, we will continue. It will grow. And again, thank you for making time for me this evening where you are.
Thank you.
We will stay in touch.
My pleasure. Yes, we will.
Thank you so much, Zahara.
Take care.